Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about NC State and Virginia scheduling an out-of-conference home and home. Not something I love by any means, but let's get into the transfer portal and let's talk about this spring portal that has been a little bit wild. Definitely not quite as wild as I anticipated it to be, but there's still some names out there that are definitely big-time names. Now we have some commitments that I want to get to before we jump into all the guys that are still out there, and it starts with the quarterback position. We had two guys that maybe a little bit under the radar, but definitely are big-time transfers for both their teams. General Booty has committed to ULM. He is going to be a Warhawk for this upcoming season. A very interesting one because it sounded like Iowa was in on this recruitment for a little bit. Now I don't know how aggressively they were recruiting him, but very interesting if they were recruiting him very hard and he decided to go to ULM. But it's very interesting for a number of reasons, mainly because he's transferring from Oklahoma, and he still gets a shot at Texas this upcoming year. ULM starts their year against the Longhorns, so I can bet that General Booty will be ready to roll going into that game. We'll definitely have a little bit extra motivation in that one. And then you have Taquan Roberson. This is someone that started a ton of games for UConn a year ago, was a very, very solid player for them. Not necessarily what Avery Johnson is, but he is committed to Kansas State to be Avery Johnson's backup. This is something that I think is going to be huge for them, not because he is Avery Johnson and can do what Avery Johnson can do. They definitely need him to be healthy and to do what they want to do this upcoming year. Avery Johnson has got to be on the field. But if you're talking about a safety net, if you're talking about break class in case of emergency, this is a great guy to have. He's a very good player that has played a lot of football in his time. Definitely can extend plays with his legs. Not necessarily the runner that Avery Johnson is, but a good safety net nonetheless for the Wildcats over there. And then you had Javarius Johnson. He is committed to UCF, this is a guy coming over from Auburn. He was a wide receiver there. UCF's just been doing absolute work. They've brought in KJ Jefferson early on in the portal cycle back in winter, but also brought in Penny Boone from this cycle. Ajay Hall is going to be a walk-on that team this upcoming year, a guy that was on Alabama and Texas in the past, so very, very talented. You brought in Ja'Cory Brown, who likely will take over for KJ Jefferson in 25, and now you have Javarius Johnson, who is going to play a big-time role for them this upcoming year. So Gus Malzahn has seen kind of a slight opening in the Big 12 and wants to kind of throw his hat into the ring. I think if he can thread a needle and get the most out of this team, they are a team that will be very interesting to watch in the Big 12 this upcoming year. And then you had Eli Stowers. He was pretty much the only tight end on the board that was a big-time name. He is finally committed to Vandy. He's coming from New Mexico State, appeared in 15 games, caught 35 passes for 366 yards. But the very interesting thing about this guy is he also threw passes and he ran the ball because he was a former quarterback. This guy's an elite athlete, so he's very, very interesting person to have where you can put him at Wildcat quarterback and he can throw a couple of passes for you. He went 4 for 8 with 99 yards a year ago, had 108 yards on 22 attempts rushing from that position. So a very, very interesting guy that Vandy might just use in weird ways because you got to get a little bit weird when you're giving up the talent that Vandy is giving up in a lot of these games they play. And then you have Curtis Perry on the defensive line, a guy that I've been watching very, very closely coming from Alabama. He was making visits around to Indiana, to Virginia Tech, to a couple other Big Ten teams, but he's landed at Virginia Tech. He's going to be a Hokie. This is a huge pickup for them. They definitely need some help on that defensive line and just that defense in general to make sure that having Kyron Jones on your roster does not go to waste, because that guy can change the complexion of your season, can make you an ACC contender right away. And then when you add someone who is an SEC type of guy in Curtis Perry, things tend to go pretty well, to be totally honest with you. And then you have JVR Scruggs, another defensive lineman. He is committed to LSU, which is music to LSU fans' ears. They absolutely needed a defensive lineman. They finally got one. And this is a guy that is coming up from the D2 level from Grand Valley State. So some people might turn their nose up at that. They might scoff and say, write him off as just another guy that is not going to catch on. But this dude can play football. There's no two ways about that. And there's plenty of success stories of kids coming from the JUCO or the D2 level to the D1 level and playing big parts. Now, LSU and the SEC is a little bit different of a ball game than some of these other places, but the reality is this kid can play, and he's going to have to be able to play for LSU to be successful. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this guy. He's definitely someone that is going to be pushed into a role that maybe he's capable of filling, maybe he's not. It'll be fascinating to watch. If he can fill that role, the LSU defense might not be quite as bad as some people might think. And then you have Lejon Cavallos. He is committed to Michigan State, a very talented corner, someone coming over from UNC. UNC's kind of gotten hurt throughout this transfer portal world over the last couple of years, to be honest. And Jonathan Smith absolutely needed this. This spring cycle has not been kind to the Spartans by any means, and adding someone like this to the back end of your defense just make you feel good for a second is definitely a big time plus. You lost a guy in that back end in Jaden Mangum that is a huge player, but adding someone like Cavallos definitely makes that a little bit easier to deal with. And then the big time name on the market right now is Cormani McClain. He has finally committed to Florida. This is something we kind of expected the last time we talked. He was visiting there, and it felt like the papers were essentially signed. Now, the very, very interesting thing about this is it doesn't sound like he's going to get a scholarship there. It sounds like he's going to be a walk-on like Ajay Hall, which is wild to me for a number of reasons. I mean, not even a year ago, this kid was a 5-star coming into Colorado with insane amounts of hype, and now he's a walk-on at Florida. And it's not that he cannot be incredibly successful. He absolutely can be. But it's one of those very, very weird instances where this kid was a 5-star, the number one corner in the entire country, and now he's a walk-on at a school that probably wanted them coming out of high school. So it's a very, very interesting thing. I don't know if it's, related to some of the things that came out during his time at Colorado, where maybe he wasn't the hardest worker that you wanted in your locker room. Maybe he took a little bit of time off when he probably shouldn't have. But maybe this is, the chip on his shoulder that he absolutely needs. Maybe this is the, knocking him down a peg will give him the perspective he needs on his situation and become the player that he's capable of being. Because the reality is this kid's got talent out the door. He can do incredible things on the football field and can be a huge piece for this Florida team. He just won't be taking up a scholarship. So a very, very interesting thing. I'd be a little bit surprised if he was a walk-on for very long there, but definitely a big decision by him, and one that kind of shows some of the humility that has kind of been imparted on him throughout the last year or so. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that one unfold. Definitely a very interesting decision for him, but it might be the best one for his football future, if I'm being totally honest. But let's jump into some of the guys that are still on the board, and it's a ton of really, really talented guys, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which is where we're going to focus pretty much all of our energy here today. Elijah Badger is a wide receiver that it seems like he's making his decision today between Florida, Arizona, and Washington. I would be very surprised if it wasn't Florida, I guess is the best way to put that. You'll find out later today at some point, but I think it's going to be the Gators on that one as well. But a pair of Louisville transfers on the defensive side of the ball might be making their way to Baton Rouge, and it would be absolutely huge for LSU if they could pull that off. Wesley Walker is the first guy on this list who I conveniently left off my big board here, but Wesley Walker is a very talented safety that has played a ton of football. 45 career games, has 184 tackles, was at Georgia Tech to start his career, then Tennessee, then Louisville, now might be at LSU. So definitely has bounced around a good bit, but you need experience if you're LSU, and this guy can absolutely give you that. Then you have Tyler Barron, who is a remarkably talented edge rusher. We've talked about USC and Miami and Ole Miss a ton. Well, LSU has thrown their hat into the ring, and I think this would be an absolutely massive win for LSU. I think more and more people, including Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong, the guys that follow this more than anyone else in the world, I think they're starting to lean more in that LSU direction as well. It's going to be really, really interesting. Now, there is a little bit of a hurdle there where he committed to LSU this winter, if you recall, before going to Louisville, and the problem with that is he has to get released from that paperwork before he can play for LSU. So I'm sure Ole Miss will do that. I'm sure that is not as big of a hurdle to jump over as some might think, but definitely a very interesting thing that if Ole Miss does not release him from that, he might just have to sit on the bench for a year, which would not be what LSU wants by any means. And then you have Khalil Jacobs. He's bouncing around right now. He's visited Auburn, is at Ole Miss right now. Canceled 2 visits to Bama and Missouri, but it sounds like he wants to reschedule those. If I'm being totally honest, I think he's not going to get off the campus at Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is going to try to lock this guy down. I think putting him next to Chris Paul Jr. would just be incredible for them, and I think they'll make it happen today, if I'm being totally honest with you. And then you have Aiden Huntington, a very talented D lineman that is a ULM guy, actually, where General Booty ended up. And he's going to where General Booty came from. Oklahoma sounds like they're very much in on this kid. When you lose someone like Jermaine Lole to Texas the way they did, you definitely need someone to backfill that. And Aiden Huntington would be a great pickup for them. And then you have Thomas Gore, a D lineman to watch from Miami, played all 13 games for them a year ago. He currently seems to be deciding between Tulane and Georgia Tech. Would be a huge player for either of those teams. I lean towards Georgia Tech direction just because they are the power conference. They have that ability, but who knows? Tulane has a lot going for them. John Summerall is a great recruiter, so we'll see what happens there. But as you can see, LSU is making a little bit of a run here. They're starting to kind of put together a little bit of a portal class that maybe won't be the last in the SEC as it is right now, which is not what you want at all. If they can reel in Wesley Walker and Tyler Barron and maybe even Brandon Lane, another guy, a D lineman from Stephen F. Austin that was committed to Michigan State, has now decommitted. If they can bring in some of those guys, it becomes a much better class and changes the complexion of LSU's season pretty much overnight. So we'll watch it very closely over the next little bit. The portal is, closed and no more people can enter, but there's still tons of recruiting going on and some big-time players still out there, including Tyler Barron, probably the top of the list there. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a Hot Take Thursday I have about the running back position coming into this year and how it might be in as best of shape as it's been in a number of years. So we'll break that down right after this.